It's my absolute pleasure to introduce our panel tonight. These panel members represent the breadth that we fund, and as I've said, we fund more than 60 areas of disease and illness. But we're not going to feature all 60, so we've picked 3 to focus on tonight: bowel cancer, heart disease and kidney disease. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Associate Professor Erin Simons. Erin is a team leader at and medical scientist at the Bowel Health Service at Flinders Centre for Innovation in Cancer. Her research focus on improving bowel cancer screening and rates to enable earlier diagnosis. Welcome, Erin. Thank you. We also have Professor Peter Saltzis, Head of the Interventional Cardiology Unit at the Royal Adelaide Hospital and Deputy Director and Leader of the Heart and Vascular Program at SAHMRI. Peter's work covers the full spectrum of cardiology research, and we proudly fund him in a project aimed at preventing repeat heart attacks. So welcome, Peter. And I noticed Thea Alex particularly, nephew, is that the story? Honorary nephew, yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, good one. And also, I'd like to welcome Professor Shilpa Jesudason, who is the head of the Central and Northern Renal and Transplantation Service. In the game they call it CNARTS at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and chairs our Kidney Transplant and Diabetes Research Advisory Committee. Shilpa provides groundbreaking care for people living with kidney disease and on dialysis, helping them to have a greater quality of life. So welcome, Shilpa. So Erin, what we'd like to do first is get all of you to talk about your areas of research focus. You've all seen the question, so you know not to answer twice. Erin, let's start with you.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to acknowledge the Hospital Research Foundation and all the donors here tonight. Seeing these adverts and hearing about the inspiring work which is being supported, it can really make a difference for Australian health. And my personal focus is on bowel cancer prevention. So I'm sure we all are familiar with bowel cancer. We have the National Bowel Cancer Screening Program. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's actually over 160,000 people in Australia currently who are surviving after a bowel cancer diagnosis. So I'm a scientist based at Flinders Medical Centre and Flinders University, and what we do is we want to improve that journey. So first of all, we want to prevent bowel cancer from happening. We want to catch it as early as possible, because what we do know is if you catch it early with these simple bowel cancer screening tests, 99% of people can be cured. And that's amazing. And it's such a simple test to do. But we also want to ensure that we look after people who have had a diagnosis. So we cover the whole spectrum from early prevention to people who are living with bowel cancer as well. And I've got a great team at Flinders where we do work in looking for new biomarkers, finding out what people think about the different tests we're doing, looking at the big data sets. But what we're doing, importantly, is being supported by the Hospital Research Foundation, is to try and improve the early detection tests. So what we know is people say they're coming in, they've got some symptoms, they might be waiting a little while to have their colonoscopy. So we're actually trialling out, it's your basic poop test, the one you get from the bowel cancer screening program from the government, but we've actually developed, working with a company that have got a new biomarker added to this test. So we're trialling this out at the moment with your support to see if that can improve the way of working out who needs that colonoscopy as fast as possible.
Thank you, Erin. Peter, do you want to give us a quick summary?
Thanks, Paul. So I want to firstly echo Erin's words about
bring
to you, to the THRF team and to the community of South Australia for ongoing support. You've supported cardiovascular research for a very long time. And we need your support because heart disease, which does come in different forms, remains the biggest killer of people in Australia and around the world. When we talk about heart disease, there are really 3 broad types: diseases of the plumbing, the arteries of the heart, which is what I predominantly deal with, diseases of the heart muscle pump, so heart failure and valve problems, and diseases of the electricity of the heart, arrhythmias. Those diseases are interlinked, but they are different. And I focus on a disease called atherosclerosis, beautiful Greek-derived word, which talks to the chronic build-up of fatty cholesterol plaques in our arteries. And I hate to say it, but many of us in this room will have those plaques developing, from early adulthood as we get older. Those plaques are what cause heart attacks, and in Australia more than 50,000 people a year will have a heart attack. Many are not lucky enough to get to hospital. We know from Australian real-world data in 2025 that when a person has a heart attack, they have a 1 in 10 chance in the next 12 months of having another heart attack or a stroke or something worse happening to them. So we know the A to F about why people develop these plaques and why they develop heart disease and heart attacks. My research is really about, firstly, treating the A to F better so that we get better results and we can prevent disease, but also we try to find out what the G to Z is, what else is going on that's driving this disease process, keeps occurring despite all of these very well-developed treatments we have. Well, you've supported a number of our projects, but one of them is really to focus on a group of patients that have type 2 diabetes, one of the leading risk factors for heart disease and kidney disease. And we know from data from the Royal Adelaide Hospital and the Queen Elizabeth over the last few years that about a third of all people who have heart attacks have type 2 diabetes. They don't do so well. They have a much higher rate of needing bypass surgery, longer periods of time in hospital, more intensive care admissions, and a lot more recurrences. So the project that the Hospital Research Foundation is generously funding is to try to understand the why do people with diabetes have such aggressive plaque, even when we're trying to treat their cholesterol, their blood pressure and so forth. And we're blessed here in South Australia. We had the Southern Hemisphere's first photon counting CT scanner at SAMRI, where I work. Photon counting technology is the latest high resolution in non-invasive imaging. It allows us to look at the heart arteries with a great level of sophistication, even inside of stents. And we've used the grant to track what happens to people's disease after a heart attack in diabetes and how different types of treatments might halt or slow down that process. We're about 2/3 of the way into recruiting about 300 South Australian participants, and we're extremely grateful to be able to do this.
Thank you, Peter, for answering all 4 of my questions. But we'll get there. Shilpa, I deliberately didn't mention in my introduction that just last week you won a global award, the first ever Australian to win the Roscoe Robinson Award for outstanding contribution to kidney care at the International Society of Nephrology Congress. Let's congratulate Shilpa. Shilpa, this is in recognition of the work you're doing here in Adelaide around pregnancy and kidney care. Tell us a little more about that and other areas of focus that you have.
Thanks, Paul. I guess I feel the Hospital Research Foundation has been part of my career in research from the very beginning. As a first-year PhD student, I used equipment that was bought by the Hospital Research Foundation. I got sent by my PhD supervisors to RSLs around the western suburbs to promote research and the work that the Research Foundation was doing. And fast forward a number of years now, and I'm privileged to lead the renal unit at the Royal Adelaide and an incredible group of researchers. We research in many different areas, in kidney transplantation, in pancreatic and islet transplantation, in best care for patients living with dialysis who can't get transplanted, and a whole range of other things. And we're very, very grateful for the support that the THRF has given in all of those areas. My personal area of interest is around helping women with kidney disease achieve a family. This is sometimes a seemingly insurmountable challenge both for those women and the clinicians that look after them. And the work that THRF has supported for many years now that we do is around generating evidence to show how to have safer care through pregnancy and achieve successful pregnancy. We've been able to take some of that evidence that we've generated and put it into toolkits and educational modules that we've now launched at a global level. So work that's been supported by the THRF is now being translated into implementation projects in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Africa, Mexico and many other countries. So it's a real privilege to be able to do that work and help these women.
And Shilpa, going off script here a bit, but you've previously told me that many of these women had been warned off trying to get pregnant in the past.
Absolutely. I get contacted by women from all over Australia, really desperate and devastated that they're told by their clinicians that they can't achieve this really important goal of having a family because of their kidney disease. These are women sometimes with very early stages of kidney disease where with the right care we can actually get them through and they have very successful outcomes. Women who are on dialysis even, women who've got kidney transplants, if we can do the right planning and care, they are very likely in a very well-resourced health system such as we have in Australia, very likely to achieve what they want. Where they get stuck is their clinicians are frightened and they're worried about risk, they're worried about adverse events because obviously the kidneys are very important. They work twice as hard when you're pregnant and there's real concern that there could be clinical deterioration. Our research has shown that actually the outcomes are much better than you'd think, even in women on dialysis or with a kidney transplant. So it's not no to these women, it's well, let's listen to you, let's listen to what your desires and needs are, let's assess your risk and let's find you a safer pathway. It's not no, and that's a lot of the work that we're doing.
It's wonderful work, Shilpa. So Peter, you've talked a little bit about your varied areas of interest, but one of the areas is new diagnostic tools. Do you want to expand on that? That's really exciting.
Yeah, so certainly, Paul, I talked about the non-invasive imaging we do of plaque, but some of the great collaborations I have as a heart specialist is to work with engineers at the University of Adelaide. And again, funded through 2 THRF grants, I work with 2 types of engineers. Firstly, mechanical engineers, who are very good at modelling what happens inside of arteries, the blood flow and the stresses and pressures that these plaques that are forming are under. And we've developed really a world-first technique that takes us way beyond the modelling that was done previously to use new measurements that can, we think, predict which plaques are going to turn to do bad things. And one of the challenges we have when a person comes in with a heart attack and we see these plaques, we don't really know which ones are going to behave badly in the future and which ones are going to cool down and not behave badly. And we think that mechanical forces, so pressures and shear stress and those things have gone unrecognised, and we think they can help clinicians make better decisions to what we call personalised care, so we can be more precise with the way we treat individuals and their narrowings. So that's a great collaboration with Mergen Gayesh, working with mechanical engineers. The other is a fantastic collaboration with more physics-oriented engineers, Jarwin Lee and Rob McLaughlin. And what we've done there is we've bioprinted a new type of catheter. A catheter is a tube that can go inside of the artery and look at the plaque to see what it's made up of. We've used those catheters in the past. The catheters we're developing are the smallest catheter ever put inside of arteries. They are literally microscopic and they can see almost down to the level of a cell. And we combine that sort of resolution with something called fluorescence technology, which tells us about how hot or active the plaque is. We've been working on this for a number of years. We took it from mice because we often start studying these diseases in animals. We've almost finished a pig project. And the THRF grant is actually helping us get this catheter to humans, both in hopefully the heart arteries, but also other arteries like the arteries in the legs.
Fantastic. It's groundbreaking work. Erin, when we talk about gut microbiome, it's always, for me, it's a great opportunity to tell lots of jokes, right? And I sometimes can't help myself. It's a bit of a dark place to go, but sorry, Your Excellency. Your specific project is about identifying from gut microbiome whether or not the person needs to be urgently pushed up the list for colonoscopy. And that's a layman's view, but tell us the details.
So I don't know if people are aware in this audience that there are long waiting lists for colonoscopies in the public hospitals in South Australia. And what we're also seeing is an increase in young people, so under the age of 50, who have bowel cancer. And I've already said that if it can be found early, we can cure 99% of people. So that's an obvious thing that we should be doing. So how do we get these people to colonoscopy as quickly as possible? So this is where we want to target. So if someone comes in for their symptoms, to their, like abdominal pain or some rectal bleeding or other symptoms which concern the person, we don't want their GP just to say, no, it can't be bowel cancer, you're too young. We want to introduce this more sensitive bowel cancer screening test, which currently is not available under the age of 45 easily. We wanted that test to easily be able to say, well, instead of brushing off the symptoms, it's worthwhile you having a colonoscopy. And this could apply to all age groups. Instead of waiting for 6 months for a colonoscopy, this test could tell us who needs the most urgent colonoscopies, as well as maybe who doesn't need a colonoscopy. I'm sure a lot of people don't want colonoscopies. And we're hoping to see that this will be a very safe way to triage people for more urgent procedures and not so urgent.
Yeah, so it's that triage capability could save lives.
Absolutely.
It could really make a big impact on waiting lists.
Yeah.
The last time I looked, I think for over 50s, it was somewhere around 17 to 20% of people use their test that they're provided.
It's about, so when you turn 50, you get your first bowel cancer screening test in the post. And if anyone here has received a test and hasn't done it, I promote that you do it as soon as possible. The current participation rate is lowest in the younger people, but on average it's about 59% are going in the bin, 41% are being done.
Yeah.
And that's really a shame when it's a free test from the government and it's a chance to catch anything early and to save lives.
And of course, if you're under 50 and you're concerned, you just go to the chemist and buy one. They're not that expensive.
Any concerns should be spoken to your GP to get the right pathway. But if you're between the ages of 45 and 49, mid last year, we actually had a change and you can actually request a bowel cancer, your first bowel cancer screening test when you turn 45, but you actually need to request it from the government. And
the trials that you're undertaking with this new innovative test, are you seeing some really promising results?
So we're still in the stage of recruiting patients and we're still looking at the results, but we've had hundreds of people participate so far. So what we've been doing is people who are having booked for colonoscopy at Flinders or at the QEH, we invite them to take part in this test, and we're very appreciative of the fact that they're collecting these samples for us. And then what we do is we analyse for the standard markers in the test, and then the new markers, and then we compare it to what's being found at colonoscopy. But we're also surveying the people to see what they think about, do they like the idea of doing a test to decide their need for colonoscopy? We're also interviewing clinicians to see, do they trust the test results to put off the colonoscopy or to triage the colonoscopy a bit faster. So we're sort of putting all the elements together to make sure it's really good for translation.
Fantastic. Shilpa, we've been funding renal research in South Australia and support for different types of surgeries for over 60 years. We've not only funded you directly, but we've funded CNARTS for many years now across a lot of different areas. What are some of the impacts that you've seen from a CNARTS perspective, some of the developments in your career?
Firstly, Erin, I'd like to let you know that I did my test
when I turned
50. Paul, I think the funding that you've given is really now embedded into our clinical care. Enormous amounts of support for our renal research laboratory, which has for decades been looking at different ways at a cellular level to try and reduce the risk of transplant rejection. Transplant patients have to take an enormous amount of medication, some of which has significant side effects. Erin and I were just discussing about the increased risk of bowel cancer in transplant recipients because of the immune suppression. And we've been focused at the laboratory level on a concept called immune tolerance, so that we can minimise the exposure to anti-rejection drugs. And it's also that work has allowed us to bring new treatments, clinical trials, etc., new therapeutics into our patients, so that often we've been one of the first units in Australia to be bringing those treatments to our patients. If you look at some of the novel therapies that we've started in South Australia, we were one of the first units in Australia to do blood group incompatible transplants. A lot of the immunology of that was based on our lab work that was supported by the Hospital Research Foundation. We have brought in a technique called auto-islet transplantation, which has been used in a number of ways, but to cure a very rare but painful and debilitating disease called hereditary pancreatitis. So people who suffer this disease, it's a genetic condition, it occurs more in First Nations Australians. The pancreas basically eats itself and causes terrible chronic pain, affects a lot of young children and really ruins their life. And with auto-islet transplantation, we've been one of the first units in Australia to develop that, thanks to some incredible infrastructure technology that Paul and the team have supported. We've been able to take the pancreas out of these people who are suffering this condition, digest it and give them back the insulin-producing cells back into their system, so that they keep all of the good bits of the pancreas but get rid of the terrible pain that the pancreatitis causes them. These are just some examples. I think the latest thing that you've funded for us is some new research that I'm doing around testing for kidney function in pregnancy, in the early stages of pregnancy. So, you know, anyone who's been through a pregnancy knows in the first trimester you go off and you have your blood tests very dutifully, and you get tested for everything under the sun. It is unbelievable to me that we don't test for kidney function in all of that, given that 1 in 10 adult Australians have got features of chronic kidney disease, and that the maternal population is getting older and having more risk factors for kidney disease. So the latest grant is around helping us look at kidney function in the entirety of the South Australian pregnant population, thousands and thousands of patients, to get an understanding of whether this is a test that should actually be embedded into routine care. If we generate the evidence for that, we could actually, you know, transform the lives of women with undetected kidney disease in pregnancy and actually substantially improve their pregnancy outcomes. So I guess that's just some examples, Paul, of the impact and potential impact of the work that you're supporting.
Thank you. And Erin and then Peter, you're in front of a whole host of donors now, and our donors influence about what we do with the money. What would you like to say to our supporters?
Thank you.
No, you've got to ask for more money.
Please, can we have more money? But honestly, it is very competitive to get research grants in Australia, and it's opportunities like this that fund these new ideas to change healthcare for people, to save lives, to improve the quality of lives, and we couldn't do it without you. So yeah, from the bottom of my heart, I really appreciate every dollar that's going into the Hospital Research Foundation, and I appreciate the Hospital Research Foundation for believing in the research that we do. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So firstly, a massive thank you, and secondly, please keep doing what you're doing and more. Minister Picton talked about the time that clinician researchers, basic science researchers spend writing grants. You know, in Australia, in the NHMRC, our national scheme, success rates are 8%. And I spend as a clinician, half of my life is as a clinician, the other half as a researcher and a research leader. Can you imagine spending 6 months of your year doing something to have an 8 out of 100 chance to get funded? It's pretty sobering, and a lot of the review process is really comes down to luck, unfortunately. The Hospital Research Foundation, first of all, bridges a big gap for South Australian researchers. You know, it focuses on our research personnel here, right across the pipeline, from the discovery science that Shilpa alluded to, through the implementation science that makes a difference to patients' lives today, and it is supporting South Australians. You know, we recently had a person in our group who was a very early career researcher get a THRF grant, her first grant. And what that means is that she's not going to be lost to research. She's not going to go into state or to private industry. She's going to continue her great work at the university in Samri. And she couldn't do that without your support and the Hospital Research Foundation's confidence in her. The other thing that the THRF grants do is they are broad across different areas of disease, but they're targeted. We're targeting First Nations health, rural health. These are areas of very high need in South Australia and Australia. And these strategic calls are so important to really cut to the chase and deal with real-world big problems. And it also brings together our research community. Paul, I've seen firsthand the work that you do connecting the different institutes in South Australia together, clinical, research, universities, to work together well. And your grants do the same. They encourage collaboration within and across disciplines. So all of that is enabled by the Hospital Research Foundation, and you make that possible. So a huge thank you.
We really appreciate you taking the time out of your valuable schedules to come and talk with us tonight. Hopefully you can stay around a little bit and enjoy the fellowship of some of the people that support you. Please show in a normal manner your appreciation.